Have you ever played Blur? You should really play Blur. It's one of those games with such a strong reputation as an underrated gem that I don't think it's really right to call it underrated anymore. It's received more love and death than it ever did in life. So this is not a review of Blur. It's been done in more detail than I would ever be able to dredge up. But I still want to tell you about it. I don't think I could stop myself from gushing about Blur if I wanted to. Mario Kart with real cars is the obvious description, and one that everyone else has already made. But that sells short the level of thought put into Blur's sandbox. Racing games are inherently a skill-based genre. Track knowledge and precision and split-second decision-making are things that can only be learned by doing. It's truly a less accessible genre than most, and yet everyone loves Mario Kart. The power-ups mean that at any point, it's anyone's race. The person in last place can fuck over the leader for nothing more than the lulz. There's only so much that skilled play can do to counteract the power-ups that favor players towards the back of the pack. But in Blur, power-ups are in the same spot every lap. Power-ups slow you down, but they don't bring you to a halt. Every weapon has its Mario Kart analog. Bolts are green shells, shunts are red shells, mines are bananas, but their balance has been tweaked to mean they require a bit more strategy than the fire-and-forget nature of Nintendo's staples, while also still maintaining the frantic feeling of Mario Kart's most heated moments. Taking the perfect line and overtaking the pack is just as thrilling as rushing to grab a shield to cancel the shunt a split second before it slams into your bumper. Played alone, or with friends, its battles are an absolute spectacle. Even as a relatively late release on the woefully inadequate Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3, Blur is absolutely beautiful. The sense of speed is impeccable. It plays with light and color in ways I'd never seen before or since. The UI and presentation are simultaneously far ahead of their time, but also wholly unique. That's not to say Blur was perfect, it certainly has its problems. It's ironic, really. This is a game that was designed by committee specifically to appeal to a wide audience. They somehow managed to create a game that was completely unique and unlike anything else before or since, yet they also managed to make it sell so poorly that it killed the studio behind one of the best reviewed racing franchises ever created. It's ironic, but not all that surprising. You see, I think Activision catches a bit too much flack for their role in Bizarre Creations' demise. Not that you can ever hate Activision enough, but in truth, I don't think any publisher could have saved Blur. Take your pick of AAA publisher, it still would have failed. And the same goes for Split Second, Driver, Midnight Club, or any other number of darling racing games or franchises that have since dropped off the face of the earth. The genre doesn't have the mass appeal it used to. I really can't tell you why, though. It doesn't seem like anyone can. Maybe it's the diminishing returns of newer technology, where each major release seems only slightly more impressive than the last. Maybe it's the shifting tastes of gamers looking for a longer-term engagement with a game, just not quite being compatible with how expensive it is to produce content these days. Blur, Split Second, and Drive Club seem like puzzling failures, until you look at the market as a whole and realize, oh shit, people just stopped making and buying these things, huh? This is true of all genres to an extent. There are more video games being made right now than ever, thanks to the proliferation of digital distribution and the rise of the indie scene, but when it comes to well-funded retail games from established publishers, there aren't nearly as many being released. And it seems more and more of those games are following formulas. You've got your Destiny-likes, your Souls-likes, your Cry-likes, your fighters, shooters, and car stealers. It's not often that a major release challenges the status quo like Blur did back in 2010, but there was a time when this sort of experimentation was commonplace. If you ask me, there was no more diverse era in gaming than the 6th generation. And that got me thinking, what if Blur was made a generation earlier? But now a quick word from today's sponsor, Surfshark VPN. VPNs, they got lots of practical uses, and being a content creator, a games preservationist, and just an avid internet user in general, I've found myself in need of a VPN more often than not. In the few short weeks I've been using Surfshark, here are a few things it's allowed me to do. I installed Escape from Tarkov when their firewall was for some reason blocking my true IP. I blocked all those nasty pop-ups while browsing old forums to research this very video, with Surfshark's built-in pop-up and cookie blocker. I also kept my browser traffic private while using Wi-Fi at work, or on the public Wi-Fi at the grocery store in the middle of the local 5G dead zone. AT&T. Surfshark has made all of that and more a complete breeze, And thanks to an offer they're making available through my channel, you can get in on it at a massive discount. Use the promo code Casey, spell it correctly, it's right in front of your face, and you'll get 3 months free and support the show in the process. So click that link in the description, get signed up, and get protected today. A massive thanks to Surfshark for sponsoring today's video, and here's hoping we can work together again soon. I think everyone that grew up playing video games, particularly in the 90s and 2000s, has those elusive titles that they rented a couple times and largely forgot about until adulthood. At which point, some random nostalgic memory drives us to seek out just what the hell it was we were playing back in the day. For me, it was rarely anything notable or AAA. Those were the games I remembered. It was the lesser known and poorly received ones that I accidentally erased from my mind. R-Racing Evolution and Extreme G3 are 2 games I rediscovered rather early on when I started playing games again. The former because the cutscenes and main character made it pretty easy to find, and the latter because the key art was burned into my brain because the game didn't work when I got it from Blockbuster, but the disc read error screen had the girl from the cover on it. This next game was a bit harder to find. This is City Racer, or if you're in Europe, Downtown Run. And it's basically a very primitive, very, let's say, unpolished version of Blur. The 2 games aren't officially related, but it's a more apt description than you might think. Because not only is this strikingly similar to Blur, it's also pretty obviously biting Project Gotham Racing, Bizarre's most recognizable work. Unlike Blur, there is no well-thought-out sandbox here. It is, very plainly, Mario Kart power-ups dropped onto the streets of Project Gotham. That is to say, it doesn't play particularly great, but there are some pretty unique and charming vibes on display here. Even the language select screen, the first thing you see when you boot up the game, has that early 2000s floaty, glitchy text thing going on, and the soundtrack consists entirely of very Euro clubby type beats. This is a Ubisoft game, and I was surprised to find it was developed not by one of the company's French studios, but by Ubisoft Romania. The vibes are still unmistakably French though. I've never seen more Peugeots in a single video game. There are other makes in the game, of course, Saab, MG, Mitsubishi, and Ford among others, but that list is pretty damn short. I don't necessarily see this as a bad thing. Racing game car lists desperately need diversity, and it's nice to drive stuff that's not in too many games once in a while. It is pretty clear that this was a budget title, but even a slashed price couldn't save it from commercial failure. Not that those poor sales were unwarranted, because this game has some genuine crust going on. For one thing, look at it. These models are pretty damn blocky, even by 2003 standards. And overall, the game looks extremely low rent when compared to basically any other racer of its day. And unfortunately, the gameplay does not fare much better. The handling feels more big rigs than PGR, with some of the most weightless, sensationless vehicles I've ever driven, and I've driven a Mitsubishi Mirage in real life. But it's not a good power-up racer either. It sits in a no man's land between the goofy, anyone-can-win vibes of Mario Kart, and the more serious, skill-based arsenal of Blur, but not in the balanced sort of way, more in the fence-sitting sort of way, where neither vibe is being done well. I think Ubisoft were going for the skill-based approach, as there are no ranged weapons in City Racer at all. No equivalent to the shells or bolts, no lightning storms, every power-up is either a buff to the player's vehicle, a close-range bomb, or a trap to be dropped on the track behind you. Every offensive weapon in the game claims to do something wildly different. If you believe the flavor text, the tripwire hacks the victim's ECU and drains their horsepower, the skull cube induces a temporary engine failure, spike strips blow tires and send cars skidding, and the bomb stops opponents in their tracks. In actuality, they're all basically just the bomb. Like, if you run into the spike strip, your car stops instantly and turns exactly 180 degrees. It more or less ruins anything resembling flow the gameplay might have had. The bomb is far too powerful for how often it's dropped, with an area of effect that covers basically the entire width of the track in every direction. But by far the most egregious is the tripwire. It's intended to function like this game's Banana Ermine, but despite the flavor text, it actually just slams on your brakes rather than draining your horsepower. But there's a bigger problem. The trip mine covers the track from wall to wall, and there is no way to avoid it. It does turn on and off in an interval, but if your only option to avoid a power-up that stops your car is to stop your car, there's no skillful way to avoid it. And that's not the case for its analog in either of the games to which it begs comparison. Probably the funniest and worst part of this is that even if you're the only car on the track, you can't not put down power-ups that you pick up. You can't drop them or discard them. You have to place them. So if you get a trip mine, you're basically guaranteeing that at some point you're going to hit your own power-up and be slowed to a crawl, and there's nothing you can do about it. So, suffice it to say, City Racer isn't all that great. I wouldn't call it terrible, at least when it's not completely dicking me over inches from the finish line, but for the most part, it plays like any other half-baked arcade racer of its day. In fact, most of the reasons to even think about this game 20 years after its release are courtesy of its failure and subsequent fade into obscurity. There is so little information out there about City Racer, its Wikipedia article is 3 lines long and I'm not exaggerating. Sales figures are nowhere to be found. It sold so poorly that it's worth more today than it was the day it came out, despite not actually being sought after or well known in any regard. There is a single review of this game on YouTube, and there are air quotes around review, because it's a 30-second segment in a series where Frameraider aims to review the entire GameCube library. Much love to the dude, this is not against him at all, but he literally brought it up out of obligation. It's a game so forgotten that its passing resemblance to Blur was the only way I could devise to spin it into a larger narrative, and I've been wanting to talk about this game for years. City Racer's failure demonstrates how much thought and talent went into making this formula work in Blur. It wasn't as simple as smashing these two games together. And it also proves just how cosmically unfair Blur's timing was. City Racer was born into a world where developers could make 2 or even 3 flops before being forced to throw in the towel. How was Blur going to survive when it was lucky to get 1? City Racer is undeniably a janky, poorly designed, ugly mess of a racer, but it's a relatively charming little game despite its obvious influences. It's a byproduct of its time, where games were cheap to make and big publishers like Ubisoft were willing to throw money at basically anything. A quaint reminder of an era where I could go into a game store and feasibly find games I didn't know existed. Maybe that latter bit speaks more to the internet age and how plugged in I've become as I've gotten older and gotten into the YouTube review space, but that doesn't mean I miss that time any less. I hope that one day someone will come back to this style of game, because in truth, I don't think there's any racer out there more deserving of a second chance. Hey folks, it's good to be back. Sorry about the long wait, but I hope you enjoyed this video, and please be sure to let me know what you think in the comments. Also, they aren't paying me for this or anything, but I want to give another shout out to Surfshark because they've been awesome to work with. Like, they were super patient and flexible with me as every video idea I tried to make kept falling apart, and they absolutely did not have to stick with me through all that, but they did. So yeah, thanks to my contact over at Surfshark, and guys, please do go give them a shot as a way of thanking them for making this video possible and a way of supporting the channel. And speaking of, equally responsible for making this video possible are my patrons. This is a Patreon-supported show, and you guys doing that, supporting the show through Patreon, has helped me a lot over the last few months, and I kind of said my piece about this last time in the update video, but just wanted to thank you guys again, and answer some Q&A questions today. Favorite games to just chill with people and play? Honestly, I love sitting in Discord calls with friends and just streaming random old PS2 and GameCube era stuff to them. It's part of how this video came to be, was just me picking random stuff off my hard drive and booting it up. There's been some really fun stuff that's happened in those clips that I unfortunately lost due to some blue screening problems, but yeah, I feel like the most fun is just to play random old bullshit. What do I consider to be the worst Need for Speed game, both in the main series and the many ports and spin-offs? I don't like the run. That's probably my simplest answer, is I don't like the run. For the ports and spin-offs, I think the PS1 port of Need for Speed 2 is terrible. So yeah, it doesn't feel like the main game at all to me. Yeah, that's really all I can come up with, though, other than the obvious that the DS ports of Most Wanted isn't good, stuff like that. But I think absolutely my least favorite is NFS 2 for PS1. What's the worst fast food item you've ever eaten? Man, see, that's the thing. I'm not that picky when it comes to fast food. I enjoy fast food. It's like a guilty pleasure of mine. I will say I do not care for Arby's. Their chicken is usually like the driest shit I've ever ordered. But other times it's fine. Okay, I'm gonna make a bit of a executive decision and say this counts. TGI Fridays opened up like this thing on DoorDash where they have another brand called Conviction Chicken. I basically got tricked into ordering it one night thinking it was, a local chicken place and not, a TGI Fridays brand. And it arrived and it was the driest chicken strips I've ever had. Fucking nasty. Coolest family car? Honda Element or Nissan Stagea. What's the earliest video game I've played on original hardware? I've played a Vectrex in a used game store. And I've played some very old arcade machines. As far as home consoles that I've owned, I think my earliest stuff is honestly NES. I had a Commodore for a while, but I never ended up actually getting it hooked up and working. Milk first or cereal first? I'm not a psychopath. Milk first. 逃げるんだよー！